Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 31st day of October in the year of our Lord 2025. Yes, this is Halloween Day, a traditionally spooky bad news day. But I have decided to use this spooky day and borrow a bit from the classic novel written by Charles Dickens entitled A Tale of Two Cities. Mr. Dickens opened his novel with quote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, end quote. That is a pretty good description of our times today. At least that's my argument for today. Dickens wrote those words in 1859 as the title and the opening of his novel, which was set in London and Paris during the French Revolution. Quote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity, end quote. That sounds so much like today because the more things change, the more they stay the same. As we all know, technology constantly changes, but human nature does not. The setting of Dickens' novel was an age of radical opposites that faced each other, much like today, but today they are not cities but political divisions. Here in present day America, we have opposing forces and contrasting views everywhere you look. In New York City, for example, there seems to be a very good possibility that the people of that once great city will elect a man named Zohran Mamdani as mayor in the upcoming election. The man is often described as a communist as well as an Islamic fundamentalist at the same time. Those two terms are, of course, contradictory because communism was founded and still is based on atheism, while Islam is obviously based on a belief in God. He does seem to have some radical ideas based on economic theories which have been failures everywhere they've been tried. He's not the first to suggest that public transportation be free without any corresponding explanation of where he would get the money to pay for it. See, folks, nothing government does is ever free because someone always pays, and the politicians want the people to give them the authority to decide who they will steal the money from. I suppose that is true democracy, whereby the mob is empowered to loot anyone not voting with the majority. Once again, it proves the wisdom of the founders who believed in individual rather than collective rights. Just wind the clock back a century or so, you'll find the words Thomas Paine, who wrote a revolutionary pamphlet called Common Sense. One article or series of articles in the pamphlet was called The Crisis. He began that section with the words, and I quote, these are the times that try men's souls, end quote. And that phrase seems more appropriate today than ever. The phrase is especially true here on Halloween Day as many vitally important things hang in the balance, such as New York City and whether that city will ever again be great or whether it will continue its slide into the abyss. So Mr. Mamdani is an example of the worst of times. The best of times is an amazing contrast whereby the people of Argentina, after decades of socialist experiments which left that once powerhouse of an economy in a state of collapse, decided to change course. What could be more wonderful than the joy of seeing voters reject the allure of socialism for the second time? Argentina's president, Javier Milei, has led his party to a landslide victory in the elections held last Sunday. Radical spending cuts, free market reforms defined the 2 years of his presidency, and the people of Argentina have endorsed his efforts and decided to continue the road to recovery. That's very good news from Argentina. The bad news, or at least I have decided to see it as bad news, is that Donald Trump agreed to extend a $40 billion loan to Argentina, which has defaulted 3 times since the year 2000. Never mind the chances of repayment. The president told the Argentine people that the money would only be coming to them if Milei was reelected, which, as I said, he was. Does that sound like an open bribe? Yes, it does, but at least it's open for anyone to see, and at least the money is for Argentine trade with the U.S. It is not a Joe Biden kind of bribe where he and Hunter get the money personally. So why is the bribe a bad thing? Well, for one thing, It's a bailout, and the American people voted for America First, which means no bailouts. They especially did not vote for a bailout of a foreign country, which might involve lower prices for their soybeans, beef, etc. Oh, well, we just move on. And anyway, encouraging free markets, especially in this hemisphere, is not such a bad thing. Milei, in office for a little less than 2 years, has reduced inflation in Argentina by 90%, cut the budget by 100%. Excuse me, folks. Argentina no longer in the desert, as Mr. Milei described this condition when he took office. The nation has climbed out of its permanent recession and now has the fastest growing economy in the Americas. GDP growth is more than twice that of the U.S. Real wages have tripled. Poverty has been cut by 40%. So, why is the $40 billion necessary? Well, that's a very good question, folks. In the meantime, the president is on a trip to the Far East where he has made trade deals with 5 countries that bring reportedly trillions in trade to the U.S., hopefully more work for Americans. He stopped in Malaysia to sign a peace deal that he helped negotiate between Cambodia and Thailand. He also met Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takachi, who is a lot closer to Mr. Trump on how she views the world than most Asian leaders are. The trade deal with Japan, worth billions for the U.S., reportedly includes rare earth minerals, thus reducing U.S. dependence on China. In a gesture of friendship and trust, Prime Minister Takachi donated 250 Japanese cherry trees to help with President Trump's beautification of Washington's efforts. She mentioned in her glowing speech that Japanese fireworks will be used in D.C. as part of the July 4th celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States, thus the 250 trees. She and the president watched part of the World Series game together. That was, I believe, the third game, which went 18 innings, won by the Dodgers, which, of course, has many Japanese players. She knew that Trump and former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe were close friends. Unfortunately, Mr. Abe now deceased, so she gave Trump his putter. She gave him Mr. Abe's putter. As a gesture of goodwill, she told him Shinzo would have wanted him to have it. Trump obviously appreciated the touching nature of the gift, expressed sadness at Mr. Abe's death, and said he accepted the gift on behalf of the United States. So these nations, once enemies in a long and bitter war, which ended in a nuclear explosion, are now good friends. So I'm going to put that down as some of the very best of times we have today, folks. The bad times always seem to happen at the same time. This time they're on the other side of the world. Despite the peace agreement brokered by President Trump, the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, apparently used the cover of Trump's trip to the Far East to attack Gaza with American fighter jets and American bombs. The Israelis accused Hamas of killing an Israeli soldier. So the attacks reportedly killed 104 people, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, which, of course, is run by Hamas. The Israeli attacks came after Israel accused Hamas of shooting an Israeli soldier, which caused Mr. Netanyahu to order, quote, an immediate and powerful attack, end quote, on the rubble already destroyed by powerful Israeli attacks over the last 2 years. The health ministry of Gaza announced that 46 of the dead were children, 20 were women. This area of the world is difficult to impossible to find peace. It's impossible to find peace. There are good times are hard to come by in Gaza. The problem, or at least part of the problem, seems to be that both sides in this dispute feel religiously entitled to all the land in the region. Neither will be satisfied with anything less than the total departure of the other side. This might be a good time for the U.S. to stop its involvement, including furnishing the weapons for the attack. Such a policy shift would indeed be the best of times for America. Continuing our examination of the worst of times, the U.S. proxy war against Russia seems to be on the verge of expanding into Eastern Europe and other NATO member states. President Trump has made some policy changes, taking a harder line against Russia in any possible peace negotiations. That is reportedly due to the influence of Marco Rubio, who seems to be very good at the job of Secretary of State, but who also may have more than just a little neocon in him. U.S. sanctions on Russian oil haven't worked out that well, but now they have intensified and seem to be having their effect. Some of the drone attacks inside Russia have been against Russian oil storage facilities. Some of the European countries seem to be at odds with the European Union's position with regard to Russia, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. Those three nations which have expressed such reservations. You probably remember that Joan and I founded and run a Christian mission / orphanage in Romania for orphan children, mostly, but not all, gypsies. I tell you that to explain that I pay particular attention to any news concerning Romania and Eastern Europe, for that matter, because it could affect our mission over there, which is home to about 50 kids who have no other home to go to. So, on the good news front, the U.S. just announced it plans to withdraw 800 U.S. soldiers stationed in Romania as part of a broader restructuring of its forces in Europe. 1,000 troops, as well as aircraft, drones, other assets, will remain in Romania. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division took over command of U.S. forces in Romania, replacing the 1st Armored Division. Perhaps that decision is a recognition of my theory that the tank is now an anachronism on today's battlefield. In light of our theme of the best of times and the worst of times, here are a few things to close this report with. In the past 2 1/3 months, ending October 15th, the U.S. national debt increased by more than $1 trillion. In light of the debt, which now exceeds $38 trillion, why is the U.S. continuing to fight and underwrite Israel's wars, or anyone else's wars for that matter? How can the U.S. afford to loan anyone anything or bomb anyone except in a dire act of self-defense? All the sanctions on Russia and China, as well as other countries which do business with them, accomplish not very much, but make more enemies, higher prices for folks here at home. Finally, folks, I could go on with this best of times and worst of times analysis all day long, but instead, let me close with some thoughts from George Washington. He and the other founders were, of course, of European ancestry. He saw and knew the political systems of Europe. He said we Americans should leverage our relative isolation and disentangle ourselves from the conflicts and eternal hatreds of the old world. We should focus on trade with everyone, prosperity for all, no entangling alliances, because they just make us beholden to others and put us in the middle of wars that should be none of our business. That sounds like pretty good advice to me, folks. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.